Okay, guys. So, all right, Harold Bloom. Let's see if we can do this. Um, so the thing for Harold Bloom, what he has below, and these you can see on your handout, there's like numbers 1 to 6, and they have these ridiculous, insane names like clinamen, tessera, kenosis, daemonization, ascesis, apophrates. Don't worry about that. You don't need that. What he tries to do here is he has this idea, and by the way, he's talking about poetry, but I have he's talking about how one poet. Strong poetry is what happens when one poet revises, misinterprets, misreads, changes, twists an earlier poet. Twists is probably the best way to think about it. The more interesting, powerful, confusing, the more interesting, powerful, imaginative twist on the old material is what makes great art. And again, it's not that it's not original. That is what originality is. Originality is the originality, the twist. That's what's original. You have to come up with an original. People think originality is just inventing a whole new thing, but that's ridiculous. Most stories look like other stories at some level. He says that what originality is the most original twist that gets you from one kind of story to another. And what he tries to do with the numbers 1 through 6 here is he's trying to describe different kinds of twists. So we're not going to spend a ton of time on this because it's ridiculous. But if you okay, can't point at that too hard. Um, he says, look at this one, a corrective movement in his own poem, which implies that the precursor poem, that's the earlier poem, went accurately up to a certain point, but then should have swerved precisely in the direction the new poem moves. So, for example, that would describe a story where the twist involves sort of making a movie that's very similar to another movie and then changing the ending. Right? You felt like that movie did perfectly, but it didn't have a good ending, so you're going to come up with a new story that's based off the old story, but you're going to give it the ending it should have had in the first place. So if you've ever seen a TV show and you felt like it had a really bad ending, what Bloom suggests you do is create your own TV show that has some similarities basically to the story, and then you can put the ending on it that you wanted, and that's your own thing. Um, so let's do some examples, because this is what you really need. Examples here are tough because it's hard to know what people know. Um, I will tell you, so I wrote a book. Don't get the book. Please don't read the book. Don't buy the book. Don't get the book. But I wrote a book 20 years ago called How to Read Superhero Comics and Why. The title, by the way, is a twist on a book, the title of a book that Harold Bloom wrote, because Harold Bloom wrote a book called How to Read and Why. And I wrote a book called How to Read Superhero Comics and Why. And what I wrote that book about was basically Harold Bloom had this theory that poems are interesting twists on earlier poems. And that powerful poems are powerful twists on powerful earlier poems. And I wrote an entire book where I said he's totally right, and this is what his superhero comic books are doing. And I wrote an entire book where I said, here are some important superhero comic books, and as you can see, every comic book that came after was trying to twist them into a new version. They were all, one way of thinking about it is every work of art is a response to an earlier work of art. So what Bloom tries to do here with these numbers is describe the different kind of twists that people make, right? So he says here, right, we had this one where a corrective movement, right? You feel like you have a movie that you like, but you feel like it made a mistake, so you make a similar movie, and then you correct it. You end it the way the original movie should have ended. So here's another one, tessera, completion and antithesis. A poet antithetically completes his precursor. See, antithetically? That's a good word. Focus on that. Antithetically. Cool. You guys know. You see in the word antithetically. See the word thesis, and you see anti, which means against. The word antithetically literally is anti-thesis. Now you know the thesis is like your main point, right? An antithesis is the opposite of that. Think about it as a response that reverses it. And so one of the things Bloom says artwork does is if the previous artwork has a thesis, then your work is an antithesis. It is the opposite of that. It is changing, or you're responding by saying, no, this person got it wrong. I'm going to do it correctly in my work of art. And these six things are 6 different twists poets can make. Some of them are more complicated than the other ones. But you can see in this one here, by reading the parent poem, that's the earlier work of art, so as to retain its terms but to mean them in another sense, as though the precursor had failed to go far enough. So you go, this previous thing didn't go far enough, I'm going to fix it. He's got another one here, kenosis. Boy, I'm not doing that, that's impossible. The latter poet opens himself to what he believes to be a power in the parent poem that does not belong to the parent proper, but to a range of being just beyond the precursor. I think we're going to need some examples. Let's do some examples. Every work of art is a response to a previous work of art. So let's start with, see, this would be more fun if I had you here, because then you could suggest things. And what I usually do is I tell students to yell things out, and usually I know what they're talking about, and I can sort of do this off the top of my head. But instead, I'm going to pick things I know because you're not here and I'm lonely. Um, Game of Thrones. Let's start with Game of Thrones. Um, Game of Thrones is a fantasy epic. It's got wizards and people with swords and shit in it. But the thing that makes Game of Thrones, is it is incredibly violent. It is brutal. Characters die suddenly. They die for apparently no reason. They'll just get stabbed in the back and they're dead. The hero. You think you got like a main character and you think this is the hero, and they just get stabbed in the back and he's dead. Um, the level of sex is very graphic. It's very high, and the characters are all cruel. They're very cruel and brutal in a way that we associate with just the worst politicians and tyrants and in the real world. So why does Game of Thrones look like this? Game of Thrones looks like this because it is a response to Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings, notice, they both have dragons. They both have heroes with swords. They both have knights in shining armor. They both have wizards. They both have dangerous magical creatures that are going to destroy the world. And the heroes have to get together and stop it. And so, Game of Thrones is a response to Lord of the Rings. It's very similar to Lord of the Rings. But what's the twist? The twist is that Lord of the Rings is like a fairy tale-ish kind of thing, where the heroes win and honor is rewarded, and people are, even they're bad guys, but the bad guys are defeated. And who are they defeated by? The honorable people, the good people, the people who chose to do the right thing. Well, George R. R. Martin, who's the author of Game of Thrones, looked at that and he said, well, that's cute for a fairy tale. And that's cute for kids. But in the real world, if you're honorable and you're nice and you're kind and you try to do the right thing, you're going to get fucked. And so what he did is he invented Game of Thrones, which has the same shit you see in Lord of the Rings: the dragons, the wizards, the knights in shining armor with the swords and the boats and the traveling to other lands and all the different peoples and races and all this shit. And they said, you know what? My twist is I'm going to take Lord of the Rings, which is all about honorableness and kindness and doing the right thing and the good guys winning. And I'm going to make it brutal. And I'm going to make it more like the real world where if you act honorably and ethically, you're going to get fucking destroyed. Because in the real world, the bad guys win. And so he built an entire fantasy epic by twisting Lord of the Rings. And that was Lord of the Rings. I could do this all day. Harry Potter. I love Harry Potter. Harry Potter's great. I'm a huge Harry Potter fan. And it's about a kid, and he's, he discovers he can do magic, and he's a wizard, and he goes to a special wizard school, and he learns all of this stuff, and then there are bad guys, and he fights the bad guys, and he wins, and it's great. There's a television show and a book series. The book is actually excellent. The television show is, there's a book series called The Magicians. The Magicians, like Harry Potter. It features a school for magical kids. The normal everyday world does not know about the existence of this school. Like in Harry Potter, it is a secret school. And our guy is a regular dude, and then it turns out he has magic powers. And so he gets to go to the special magical school. What's the twist? The twist is that it's more like, if Harry Potter is like Wizard Middle School and Wizard High School, The Magicians is like Wizard Grad School. The kids are older. They're also fucked up in the way that we associate with people. The main character is going through clinical depression. And the wizard school that he goes to involves drinking too much and getting fucked up and having bisexual threesomes and doing cocaine and generally just making a fucking mess of your life, which is what a lot of people who are in grad school are doing. And so it's a version of, and it's like Game of Thrones. It's kind of meaner than Harry Potter. And one of the most interesting things about it, and one of the things I love about The Magicians, is that the character has clinical depression. And he thinks, if I could just be in the wizard school, I'd be happy. And then he gets there. And you know what? It doesn't solve anything. And it doesn't help him at all. Because in the real world, you think the solution to your problems is, if you could only get into this school, you'd be great. If you could only get if you could only get this job, everything would be great. But in the real world, it doesn't work like that, because wherever you go, there you are. And so even if you go to the magical wizard school, you're still you. And you're going to need to deal with your problems in here. Getting into some school or getting a cool job isn't going to solve it for you. So The Magicians is a twist on Harry Potter. All right, so I'm going to come back and talk about some more examples.